forces us to think. And what I mean by that is everybody that is in the industry, if you're growing and trying to scale, you have things running, 90 miles to nothing, and you've got 100 of those things running in different areas. So in putting together the cash flow budget, it forces you to think. You're able to, and you know what? I don't want to assume that everybody knows what we're talking about here, but as far as running a cash flow projector on a project, you're forced to see, okay, what is my cash outlay week by week or month by month as I start this job, right? And when is my money going to come in? So now I can see my bottom line. What some of the biggest things that has drove for us is, again, forcing us to think, okay, when are we going to order materials, right? Maybe the old school way was that we ordered all of our materials for the project up front, we staged them, we had them on hand. Well, we build a cash flow projector and we see that, hey, that could cause a little bit of financial strain. Can we wait for, let's say, the sheet metal flashing and some of these accessories until 2 months into the project? Oh, we can. Checkmate. Okay, got that. We can move that. Now we've eliminated some of those things. Secondly, yes, we absolutely look at it sometimes and say, okay, do we want to put internal crew members on this, which we pay on a weekly payroll, or do we want to subcontract a portion of this out, right? So that we can have more favorable terms with our labor that match up next to when we're going to get paid. So sure, we make those decisions all the time. I think one of the biggest things, though, that it does, again, is it gives you and forces you to think a little bit. I think that putting together cash flow projector not only helps us financially, it helps us operationally. Absolutely. with efficiencies, because now we're thinking about what are all the things that need to be ordered and need to be procured for this project. It leaves no room for you to leave out little things, such as the sheet metal flashing, such as some of these small things that you're going to have to purchase, which sometimes stretch out the timeline on closeout and get your final check in. So I would say systematically, even if it's just like 10 minutes having to think about how's this project going to work, it lines those things out for you. And last but not least, Scott, it depends on, what field you're in, but it forces you to think about those receivables. Okay. So we've had times to where it's not again, I go back to the new construction where we're working with an architect and a general contractor, and the contract or the draw schedule is written, instead of percentage of completion, it is a draw schedule saying X amount upon starting the project, 40% upon this part of the project, to where you actually write it out. Some of the biggest, I guess, advantages to having that cash flow projector is if that's not decided upon early on in the contracting, you now have the ability to shift that and say, okay, maybe our typical is, I don't know, to make something up, 10% down, 30% on completion. Maybe you look at this and you say, oh my gosh, because of what we've got to put into this and how the cash is going to move on this, we need to do 10% down, 50% up front. And that's a game changer 3 months down the road when you hit that point that you would have had 30%, but now you have 50%, and you can continue operating your business and focus in the areas that you need to, instead of sitting at a table wondering why the hell you're such a failure, which I've been at that table plenty of times.
That's a great segue to what I was going to try to describe next. Is if I were to summarize what a cash flow does,
mm-hmm.
If you're in construction, you win a job that you bid. It's a great day. You plan for a profit, you plan for the expenses on one piece of paper as if everything happens at once.
Sure.
And then the contractor, general contractor, the owner, whoever you're working with, will give you a job schedule. And then you look at that schedule, meaning like it's going to start in mid-June or it's going to start July 1st. And then you marry that up to all the other jobs you have going on. And then there becomes a problem, maybe, or maybe it works perfect. You're like, oh, I'm going to need this crew to start on this job on week 1, but they're not finished with this other job then. And you're like, whoa, there's a problem. What do I do? And you make decisions. There's then the scenario where you're trying to think about, okay, I only have a certain amount of time to do this job. Maybe you're up in the north and it's summertime going into fall, and you have to have certain stages done before it starts to freeze or before it gets too cold. So you start moving and jockeying around your labor force, or like Andrew mentioned, you make a decision about maybe I need to subcontract labor this out because I got to get this going.
Mm-hmm.
So what the cash flow does for you is the same exact thing as what I just described with what the work schedule does. So you take your bid and you get the schedule that you're supposed to keep, meaning the calendar of days. When you lay out the cash flow and marry it up to that schedule, it's going to do the exact same thing for you and show you, oh, I have surpluses of cash here, or I have lack of cash here, or I'm going to be short here, here, and here. And it takes the cash that you need on a week by week basis and marries it up to the job schedule and your bid.
Right.
And then you are like completely empowered to make every decision you need proactively instead of reacting in the moment, which might actually be 5, 10, 20 weeks down the road after you start.
Right. So, Scott, I'd like to know, what would you guess that the percentage of the audience, people who are watching and who will watch this later, what's the level of complexity of their businesses? Because I can't help but think, like, if you would have been saying this to Andrew 5 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago, and you would have jumped straight in and saying, hey, you need to have a cash flow projector, and you need to be doing that for every project, and this is going to help you do all these amazing things. I think the first thing that I would have thought to myself at that point was, okay, that's great. To have that, though, I need to know what my costs are for every single job. I need to know what my expected margins are for every single job. I need to know how much of that is labor, how much of that is materials. And Andrew 4 years ago would have had no real way to lay that out for myself. So I would have probably got to the cash flow projector, which is a very simple model, and been like, okay, let me type some things in here. So what percentage of the people that you think will watch this are actually doing estimating to the degree that they have a budget during the pre-con phase to where they have every item lined out? Do you have any idea on that?
You know, without knowing who's actually listening to this now or later, I would say I'll give you the answer based off of the general customer that comes to us, or potential customer. I would say it's anywhere between 30 to 50% come to us with some idea of a project cash flow, like thought in their head. It's not necessarily
Right.
on paper, and it's not laid out per schedule or per project. What I would say in addition to that is, I think most customers that have at least bid a project, like they had a bidding process, they have some type of bid template they use. And it can be as simple as, I think I'm going to be on the job for this long. I think my labor is going to be X amount. I think my material is going to cost me Y, this much, and etc. Or it might be, it could be even more simple to whereas they sort of look at the job and they've done it long enough and have a gut feel, and they say, oh, this is a $200,000 job. 30% is labor, 40% is material, and I got a 30% margin.
Right.
It can be as simple as that. I think if you at least have a bid template, if you bid a job with something more than just your gut, you have some type of piece of paper, structure, process that you use to look at a set of drawings, you do a takeoff on it and apply cost.
Right.
You're capable, and you should also be able to build a project cash flow.
Right. And so I just want to make sure that we don't leave anybody out of the conversation, because of course I know you personally, and I know that our whole purpose in doing this is to help anybody and everybody, not because we know everything, because I can assure you I do not. But if there's anybody out there who's hitting big jobs, or they're getting decent ones, and they're still building out those processes through budgets, I want to make sure that we include everybody in that conversation. And so I can tell you that for me, I still see a lot of people, and it may be just be the roofing industry, because we're roofers, we're a little bit less complex, it seems like, but I see guys getting big jobs who are still bidding things off of just a price per square, right? And they're bidding things off of the old, what's your profit margin? And they say 10 and 10. Like, who told you that, right? But there are still people that have pricing that comes from like third party estimating softwares, and they know that, hey, this is the price per square for my industry on TPO. This is the price per square on tile. I can't speak to all other trades, but I want to make sure the guys out there that are doing that and aren't quite to the point to where you're putting together full blown cost-based budgets before you roll into a job. You probably have an idea of what your profit margin is on jobs, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be bidding them just price per square without having a cost budget. So we can easily reverse engineer back to that to get to the cash flow budget, because I don't want somebody who's maybe starting to get these big jobs, and again, they're not doing the budgeting like that, to feel excluded, like they can't do a cash flow projector, because it's gonna help that person maybe more so than it even helps me, because the new and the larger projects are a new thing to them. So taking your price per square or price per whatever unit it is, if you know just roughly what your profit margin, your gross margin is on jobs, if we can back that out and say, okay, it typically costs us 70%, right, of our cost of goods, our labor materials. And then to what you said a second ago, Scott, break that cost of goods down to say 50-50 even, right? If typically your labor costs you 50 and materials cost you 50, those are literally the only three multipliers that you would need in order to get the information you need to blow out into this cash flow projector. Because then past that, most people who are tuned into this or planning to put together a cash flow model, they can think through, okay, when do I need these materials? When do I need this labor? But I would just make sure everybody knows that, like, it doesn't matter how simple, quote unquote, simple your bidding is right now. You can and should be utilizing this.
Yeah, you make a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. If you're going to manage your material cost and your labor cost, and that's the only thing you did,
right,
you can find tremendous benefit, more profitability, and a lot less stress by doing a project cash flow. Even if those are the only two things that you actually think through and manage on a cash flow document.
Sure.
Which we're going to give you a cash flow document and an entire instruction manual that's very simple how to use it. It's a spreadsheet. It's already built in. Matter of fact, you can go to our website and download it anytime you want. But we'll also send it out to anybody who's watching this now or signed up for the webinar. You'll get that.
Nice.
And it's the exact one we're talking about. So don't worry about making a ton of notes. You're going to have exactly what you need in your inbox. And you can always go download it from our website at any time. But
it's awesome.
Transitioning, Andrew, once you do get used to those type of things and you are managing just the cash in and out, can you talk a little bit about margin, your opinion on the difference between margin and positive cash flow?
What's the difference in the two?
Yeah, in real world construction for you.
Well, I think you kind of nailed it earlier. You can have a job that has great margin in it, right? But at any given time does not have any margin in it. In fact, it's in a deficit position. So two very, very different things. And it doesn't even have to be on a large project like I mentioned earlier. The fact is that business doesn't happen in little silos. Like, I got this job, it carried a 30% margin on it. And I laughed internally at what you said a second ago. Like, you get a new contract and everybody cheers and is so excited. But I always laugh when we get a new one, and especially from somebody outside of the contracting world says, "Wow, man, that's awesome! Congratulations on that job." And I'm like, "Yeah, now I got to produce it." Right now, all the fun starts. It's like, it's a blessing, but at the same time, we've got to produce it. So, to go back to the question there, the differences is that margin on a job is me looking at a profit and loss statement, right? As if the start to finish of the job happened like that, right? And one day I brought in all the money for the job. I incurred all the costs, right? I paid all the bills, and what was left at the end of that 24-hour period before all the bank, everything cleared, I have a margin, right? That sounds great, and that's cool to see on paper. But what most people are watching know is that that's not how it works. The money comes in at different times. And a lot of times, not even as you planned, right? and the money goes out at different times, most times earlier than you planned. So positive or negative cash flow is taking a profit and loss and throwing, I don't know, the real world time into the equation.
I couldn't agree with you more. In its simplistic definition, it's, do you have, how much money do you have going out, and how much money do you have coming in? And if you got more going out than you have coming in, that's negative. Positive, that's negative cash flow. If you have more coming in than you have going out, that's positive cash flow. And it has no impact on margin. You, like you said, you can have great margin, but the margin just doesn't happen until you're 50, 60, or 70% of the way through the job.
Right.
And matter of fact, that's actually very common in a construction project. You might not even be positively cash flow, just have positive cash flow just for that project until you're 50% billed and paid.
Well, but let's two other things to add to that, Scott, is you've got, that's just one project.
Right.
And I'm assuming that most people watching aren't just doing one project. And I could be cynical and say, okay, Scott, one project, do I really need to go into all of that detail? I pretty well know how it's going to work. I'm going to bill them. But if you're doing multiple projects, you've got, let's say, 100 things that could go wrong with the timing and the way money flows on one project. Well, let's start to extrapolate that out. Let's add a second job. Let's add a third job. And let's start doing multiples of 100 that could happen and things that go wrong. You're in the thousands of things that can go wrong very quickly. And if a small percent of those things go bad quickly, then overall you're in a bad position, right? Yeah. So it's anytime doing multiple jobs, that comes into play. And I had something else, but now I can't remember because I said the word extrapolate.
Well, one thing I would add to what you said is, even if you're only doing one job right now, if you plan on ever doing 2 or 3 jobs, one of the best times to ever implement learning the cash flow is while you only have one job. Because sure, once you have 2 and 3 and you're like, oh, now I got to do this project cash flow, and you have to learn it and implement it at the same time, it's even more difficult.
Right. And another point to that, you say that, okay, you get to 50 to 70% way through the project is when you start to experience your margin. But, you know, if you're bidding new construction and you're competitive bidding, which is 2 different worlds, right? Like negotiated work versus competitive bidding. And you're in a situation where 5 to 10% of your money is held up in retainage until whenever the general decides to pay you sometimes, right? You got to take that off the top immediately, that 5 to 10%. And some of the guys out there are bidding with not much more than 12, 15% margin in some of their jobs. So how much room do you really have if you have a contract that 10% retainage is being taken out from every single progress billing? So if you get 10 out and you're bidding tight on some of this competitive bid, like your margin for error is razor thin, because if one tiny thing goes wrong, you're now in a negative cash flow situation, and that sucks, right? I mean, I've been there before, plenty of times. And you're playing the game now where you're dancing your payables versus receivables. And newsflash for anybody who is not in the new construction game, you don't pay your bills, your next check isn't coming from your general contractor, because suppliers are very, very good now about those lien notices. And that shit ain't coming. It ain't getting cleared up till you get your cash flow cleared up.
And if you don't get your cash flow cleared up, you're not getting your retainage, which means now you've worked for free.
That's right.
Let's give you, like, using that scenario, I want to point out one other thing and how that shows up and feels. If you have bid the job and you have 10% retainage and there's a razor thin margin there, not a lot of margin after retainage, what that also means is the entire time you're on that job, you cannot use or rely on any cash from that job to pay any overhead whatsoever, which means salaries that aren't attributed to the job, insurance costs that you haven't budgeted on that job. It could mean debt service payments, trucks, equipment payments. It could mean anything anything at all, any expenses or travel, anything that's associated to your business. Every time those deposits come in, regardless of how big they are, you can't use them for anything overhead related, because you actually don't have enough cash on that job to run that yet until it's positive cash flow. So really, until you have positive cash flow on that project, you can't use any of that money to even handle overhead expenses. So
Right.
that's another thing why a project cash flow is so critical is, did you allocate overhead into your job? And if you haven't, you could have a 12 or 15% margin, but really once you allocate overhead into that, you may only make 2 or 3% margin.
Right. And that's a whole nother conversation that we could talk about for hours. Not knowing your numbers to the degree of what is it actually costing you? Like even if you're not, in a subcontractor model to where you've got guys and you've got internal people, like, okay, have you figured in your labor burden? Have you figured in your multiplier on workers' comp? And I know for some of the people watching this is like elementary stuff, but it certainly was not elementary for me within the past 5 years. And knowing those things, what's it truly costing you? So to your point, Scott, you've got zero room for error if you're not forcing yourself to think through some of these things.
Yeah. One other thing I want to talk about with the project cash flow with use in particular. So once you create that, we've talked enough about the pitfalls and the bad things that can happen and how this can mitigate it. But
Right.
once you have that project cash flow, talk about how it actually can help you make more money, make a better margin.
On projects specifically?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
and maybe you have an example on a way that you've done it yourself.
I always want to go to like the macro picture, right? Like the company-wide picture, not just the project.
Yeah.
I can start with the project and say, okay, what are the benefits is basically what you're asking. Becoming more profitable. Let's see. I think we all know in the contracting space, in order to be profitable, regardless of how it was bid, we have to make operational decisions throughout the job, right? And as much as we would like to think that, we know our trade and we're going to make the right decisions based on just because it's the right thing to do, based upon because we're good at our craft, and based upon there's a spec book that tells us how to do it. The truth is none of that stuff is other than the spec book maybe is quantifiable enough for us to really make decisions off of. Humans, we're going to make decisions when we know that there's a black and white, a dollar amount attached to the decisions that we make. So by putting that cash flow projector together, we now have, I guess, what I would refer to as a judge, right? We now have a scoreboard to make the decision. And it wasn't until I started putting together project cash flows and an entire company cash flow projector that I overcame some of the procrastination that I didn't even know existed in me. So as soon as I go back to saying making fact-based decisions, as soon as the facts were there, the black and white, Andrew, if you and your team don't do this or execute on this decision that you made as a result of doing your cash flow projector, you will either not have enough money to pay your bills, or you'll be leaving on the table tons of profits, right? And so to the more sunny side of what you're asking, how does putting together a cash flow projector make you more profitable? Well, let's see. It allows you to see the money in, money out. And going back to the time example, yes, we're seeing over time how this project performs. But at the end of this cash flow projector, which I believe the model that you'll be giving everybody has, we'll see our margin at the very end of it, right? And so it's going to put it right in front of us at the beginning of the job. And we'll start making decisions on, okay, this portion is going to be subcontracted out. I can get this done for 5%, 10% less than what my team would cost. Now as we roll into what everybody is experiencing, I think we've got lumber overall is up over 50% on all, random sizing. We got plywood that's like 3 or 4X. We're now going to be playing a game in today's market to where timing matters even more about when we order materials. So we have the opportunity in planning up front to become wildly more profitable because, again, I can't word it much any other way than we're making fact-based decisions. And the cash flow projector forced us to see the facts, or at least generate what the facts are. So I don't know. Does that answer your question, or am I just repeating the same thing?
No, I think it does. I think one of the things I think you told me once before was utilizing, well, two things. If you had the money you needed up when you do have the money you need, you can gain efficiencies in your labor costs by, if you have a run of the project, for example, if you have the right, if you control the site, for example, for a certain period of time, even if it's a week, and you
Right.
could utilize additional labor, how you could structure those efficiencies to get done quicker and therefore reduce your overall labor costs. So even though you might have a higher labor cost in a certain few weeks
Right.
that you didn't necessarily anticipate, they were so much more efficient that you actually lost a whole week or two's worth of cost of labor in that entire job, and you're able to move people to another site or something quicker.
Right. Well, I keep going back to most things that we do in business, being only 20% mechanics, right? More of it mindset and what we're doing. So I think everybody would agree, and I know you would, Scott, that if you're in a position to where you have the facts on how the finances are going to work, or you have a source of capital on how this job is going to work, you're going to make different decisions. You're going to make decisions that are geared towards more efficiency rather than just being able to pay the bills at that time, or rather trying to keep expenses down, right? I mean, without a plan and without capital, you can't make those decisions, because the fact is the numbers are the numbers. You don't have the ability or the room to do that. I would add to that when it comes to managing cash and cash flows, if you don't have the information and you're not planning ahead, and you're stressed about it, and I would venture to guess that if people are watching this, they've been stressed about cash before. They've been stressed about money before. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Here's what I know about that. As far as money, people associate money with something far closer than even the relationships they have with people, any other possession in the world that gives us a certain level of value that we place on ourselves. And so I say that to say it creates probably more stress than any other stressor in a human being's life. And what does stress do? Stress creates cortisol. Stress literally creates hormones and chemicals in your body that limit and reduce your creativity. They reduce everything that you're good at. So if you're having those issues and you're stressing about that, and I'm going to get back to money here in a second, Scott, but if you are stressing about all of that, there are literally biological things suppressing your ability to make more profits, and they're hormones and they're chemicals in your body. So now I can't think clearly about what is the right decision to make with my labor? What is the right decisions and calls that I need to make to my suppliers? And to be profitable, we got to be creative. We've got to be able to do what we do best. We've got to be able to do and produce good quality in the field. And if we don't have this shit straight, then we're literally biologically being shut down from doing that.
Well, I get accused a lot of sounding foo-foo maybe when I talk that way.
Are you about to accuse me of that?
But the reality is, it's true, man. When you're stressed, the only thing you can think about is what you're stressed about. And if you have all these other opportunities that come in front of you while you're stressed, or you have these other problems that you need to fix while you're stressed, the only thing you do is make that stress go away as fast as you can. And more often than not, if not most of the time, you're going to make that immediate stress go away with something that probably isn't good for you in the long term.
Listen, I would have said the same thing years ago, that what does that have to do with the black and whites of business, and what is, all these things. But the truth is, once I was able to actually learn the science behind it, like it's not power of positive thinking. It's not any of this crap that people hear and they think is just this, like you said, what'd you say? Frou-frou?
Foo-foo.
Foo-foo? Frou-frou?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, it's not. It's science, as I think Ron Burgundy would say. It's science.
It is. Well, man, I hope everybody's been able to get some good stuff from this today. We will definitely send the cash flow out. Andrew, you've been awesome as always to help, and you sharing and how well you share, the way you communicate these things, and just, of course, your willingness to tell the stories. And to give you guys an idea, Andrew's got a great, successful business right now. Doesn't mean it's not without its challenges like everyone else's. Doesn't mean it's not without its great
never buy that
successes.
shit, because it has it.
I mean, I've watched Andrew just in the last couple of years grow his business by a lot, take on different jobs, mold and modify his business through COVID. around big projects, small projects, insurance, commercial work, all different things that he's never done before, but he's armed and equipped with this kind of information at the project level, also educating himself on the foo-foo stuff that we
That's
talked
right.
about, that all those things combined together have helped him go from a stress environment to a much less stressful environment, and one that you can actually capitalize on.
That's the key, Scott. Less stress. And I actually, last week, week before last, I asked one of my mentors I'm working right now, the great Tony Robbins, like, you want to talk about frou-frou stuff. So I told him that I needed to abolish fear in a couple areas of my life. And he said, Andrew, you'll never abolish fear. You don't need to abolish fear. You need to be fearless. And he said, what I mean is fear-less. And so he told me you need to have less fear, learn to manage it. And it's the same thing as you're pointing out here. I want to pull that out. It's less stress. It's not that you managing cash flow and all these things, they're never going to go away. But when you have the tools that you need, then that stress is reduced. You're able to do the things that you need to do and perform the way that you can perform.
So I'm going to ask and see if we have any questions for us that we don't mind answering live if we have them. And if not, the information's up on the screen. You can contact us here, send us an email, go right to our website, type in any questions. We'll answer them all and get right back to you. But if you do have any questions, you can put them right in the chat or the Q&A feature. And if they're there, we'll pull them up right here, right now, and see what we can put together.
Yeah, bring it on. And while we're waiting, Scott, can I keep talking?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I wanted to point out that a lot of this conversation is about the project cash flow specifically, but starting to do the project cash flow is the foundation to be able to understand for your specific business how you can build out and run a company-wide cash flow. And that's a pretty powerful thing to be able to move from project to project. And I've just experienced it only this year, probably the last 6 months, being able to go from a project to project basis to being able to truly say, I can see months ahead and I'm making decisions today about stuff for June and July. And again, doesn't mean it goes without any stress or that everything's perfect, but we're making adjustments way in advance. And it all starts with understanding your project cash flow projector before you can roll into something like an overall company cash flow.
That's right. And when you have those cash flows, you can start making really powerful decisions. Even the most simple decisions become easier. Things like, when should I hire the next administrative staff?
Mm-hmm.
When should I hire the next project manager? Should I buy a truck, lease a truck? Should I buy a piece of equipment or lease it? What's the most important thing? What's the smart thing to do? Those are the decisions that become so easy and crystal clear when you have a company-wide project cash flow. It's right. It makes it easy.
Sure.
Well, I don't see any questions and answers in there or in the chat, but
maybe we answered them all.
Maybe, who knows? But if they come in, I'll certainly send them back an answer, and we'll get the right answer to the right person and go from there.
Sounds good.
Andrew, man, I appreciate you joining us, and I appreciate you taking the time to do that. I know we've definitely got some good info out there and help everybody. I'm going to send out that project cash flow with all the instructions to everyone that registered. And anyone that watches this on replay and you want that, you can go right to our website to the resources page, and you can access that project cash flow and download it right away anytime you want.
Awesome. Thanks again, man.
You too. Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy your week. Thank you.